Hello, this is Eleanor Wyatt of the Benji Ministries. We have been sharing the love of God in eastern Uganda since 2019, and today I have a story time for you. When I was in Uganda in late 2020, one of the villages we go to had a horrible road to get back there. There were three really bad mud holes that were actually mud stretches of mud holes that it was always a challenge to get back to the village. And we would go there on Fridays. Well, one day we had made it back there and we were coming out. And we made it through the first two mud holes, the worst ones, okay. And when we got to the third mud hole, we were almost through it. And it was like an angel or somebody just went boop and pushed us over to the side into deep mud. We were in a four-wheel drive van, and although it could travel through a lot of the mud, our frame was sitting on the hard ground and the ruts were so deep with mud, the tires weren't even going to the bottom of the rut. So we were totally stranded. I couldn't even get out of the van very easily because there was just a huge mass of mud beside me. And we're 3 miles or so off the nearest paved road out in the countryside. Well, as we got stuck and we were like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? There's no AAA in Uganda. Just down the road, about 70 yards, 70, 80 yards under a big mango tree, there was a group of young men that were sitting resting. They had farm tools. They'd been working in the fields around there. And they jumped up and started coming toward us. And Musumba, my colleague, was translating for me as they were speaking. And they said, oh, that's the Mzungu. That's what they call people this color. That's the Mzungu who helps our village. We should go help her. And another one said, yeah, maybe she'll give us some money. And another one said, well, even if she doesn't, we still should help her because she's the mother of our village. I had never met them, but they knew of me, and they knew that we were helping widows and fatherless children and teaching the Bible out there. So these young men came over, and you could tell they had probably been drinking some, and but they grabbed their tools and they began to dig the mud out. They took machetes and cut branches off the shrubs along the side of the road, and after, I don't know, 20 minutes or so, they got us unstuck, and we managed to pull out and pull over where the road was dry. And I got out to thank them and to give them some money because they had worked quite a bit to get us out. And the young man who seemed to be kind of the ringleader spokesman, I later learned his name was Livingston. He thanked me for the money, and he said, but thank you for paying us, Mom, but what we really need are Bibles. Can you bring us Bibles? And I said, well, I don't have any today, but if you meet me at the meeting place next Friday, I will bring you Bibles. And they said, okay. So the young men went on their way, and as our team got back in the van and were heading on out, I asked everybody, I said, do you realize that was the divine appointment God had for us to meet those young men? And I said, there's no coincidence in God's kingdom. Nothing catches God by surprise. So God wanted us to meet those young men. So we began praying for them. I prayed all week long. And the next Friday, when we were back in that village, I got there to the meeting place, and Livingston was the only one of that group who showed up. But he came and he listened to the Bible study, and I gave him a Bible. And then he said, would you meet with me and my friends and teach us the Bible? And I discussed with Musum, and we decided we could do that on Mondays. So we said, okay, well, I'll meet you on Monday. And he said, yeah, I'll bring my friends. Well, we met that following Monday, and Livingston was there, and he had 14 people with him, so 15 people. And I began, I began sharing the gospel with them. And I'm thinking I have 6 weeks before I'm leaving and to go back to the States. So I thought I want to teach them the book of Ephesians. So great summation of who we are in Christ and who we're called to be and what to do with that and how it impacts our lives. So I began with there. And that day, of the 15 people there, 12 people prayed for salvation that day. The next week we came back. Only 9 of those people came, but they brought 11 more. And all 11 prayed for salvation. The next week they came back and brought 17 more, and they all got saved. The next week they came back and they brought 18 more, and they got saved. And then the next week they came back and brought 28 more, and those people prayed for salvation. We were growing. And we used to call them the Mudhole Congregation because that's how we met. And what has happened as a result, there is a strong congregation in Belonga Village where that mudhole, near where that mudhole encounter was. And there's a beautiful congregation of people. Now, one thing that's interesting, if you heard my first story, I talked about Richard, the young man who had the boy with the burned leg. When I brought the Bibles that first week, and Livingston was the only person there, I learned that Livingston is Richard's younger brother. So he had seen his nephews get prayed for and healed. And so he came, and Livingston has brought probably over 200 people are in the kingdom because he said, come and see. Come and see. Let me show you what I have found. Another thing we didn't learn till much later, Livingston told us that day we met on the way to the mud hole, he was literally on his way to a friend's house to get a rope. His life was so miserable. He had already purchased a knife, and he had purposed in his heart that he was going to execute his wife and children and then take the rope and hang himself and put everybody out of their misery. But instead, they met us at the mud hole. And Livingston said, when he asked for Bibles, he said, I don't even know where those words came from. They just came out of my mouth. And Livingston didn't hang himself. He came into the kingdom. He has brought his wife and his children with him, and so many of his family. Now, you know another thing. On my next trip to Uganda, as we headed out to the village on that same road that was always so terrible, the road people had finally repaired the road, and it had culverts, and it was smooth gravel all the way out to the village. No mud holes to contend with. And it almost made me weep because, you see, the book of James says, consider it all joy when you encounter various trials. And those mud holes were definitely trials to get to the village. But had the government decided to repair that road before I met Livingston and those young men, we never would have gotten stuck at the mud hole. We never would have encountered those young men. And Livingston would never have come into our lives or into the kingdom. You see, sometimes the mud holes serve a purpose. And in Livingston's case, it's so he could connect with people who could tell him about the God who created him and the God who loves him and the God who can give everlasting life. Livingston is just one of those young men. And as his life changed, so many others have said, what has happened to you? Why are you so different? And he says, come and see. That's the Lord's invitation to all of us. Come and see if God is real, and find out for yourself the beauty and the life that comes from serving and knowing and having a living relationship with Jesus Christ, Yeshua the Messiah. Thanks so much.